The decision to build a standing navy had not been an easily won debate, but once the Naval Act of 1794 had approved the construction of 6 ships, the next difficult decision was what kind of ships to build. The design of the new ships would have to meet a diverse array of goals. With only 6 ships available, they could not be the lumbering massive ships of the line that were used to operating in large numbers in fleet formations like those of Britain. But the light frigate designs that Britain and France used for scouting and raiding didn't have the firepower to stand up against a range of larger opponents. As a result, Joshua Humphreys, the designer of USS Constitution and USS United States, sought to create a hybrid vessel that would meet a mix of the goals of both the previous designs. The new American ship would be a single-deck frigate, but would be built substantially larger than the previous frigates. The increased size would allow larger, heavier guns and more of them to be mounted on the ship, while still maintaining the sleek underbody that provided frigates with their maneuverability. To do so required additional support frames to carry all of that weight and prevent the keel from hogging or bending at the ends under the strain. Humphreys incorporated a set of diagonally laid frames in the center of the vessel that would support the ends and maintain the excess weight along the normal and straight design of a frigate. The ship also employed a larger tumble home or curvature to the hull above the water line that provided a greater degree of stability for the heavier load of the guns on the upper decks. None of these ideas was original in and of themselves, but together they contributed to creating a new class of warship. The demand for materials and supplies for these ships would draw in artisans, merchants, and industries from across the United States. Shipbuilding was an industry that had sprung up in the American colonies in the late 1600s, but these were the largest ships of any kind to yet be built in America. The challenge meant not only acquiring timber and fittings, but also acquiring all of the skills needed to assemble the ship, and doing so in the numbers that were needed to create ships of such a large size. One of the most difficult construction decisions to fulfill was the decision to use live oak for the framing of the ships. Live oak was only available on the densely wooded coastal islands of Georgia. This form of oak was heavier and far more durable than white oak, but it was also incredibly difficult to harvest from these islands. St. Simons, the primary island from which live oak was harvested, is surrounded by miles of tidal marsh and winding shallow rivers cut through the marsh. The Navy initially sent a team of New England timbermen to harvest the live oak, but many of them quickly succumbed to disease or simply abandoned the difficult work site. When a second Navy ship arrived to begin transporting wood back, they discovered nothing had been cut. The Navy officers on site turned to the landowners, who had a number of enslaved workers. They essentially rented these enslaved people to the government to complete the work. When a truce was formed with Algiers in 1796, construction was halted on 3 of the frigates, but construction on USS Constitution, USS United States, and USS Constellation continued. Under construction in the Edmund Harp Shipyard in Boston, Constitution was the largest ship that had ever been built in the city. Though not yet laden with ballast or guns or outfitted with a rig, the ship was still so large and heavy that it could only be launched down the ways in a lunar high tide. So when the tide predictions were right in September of 1797, amid much great fanfare, the launch was scheduled and the crowds gathered for an auspicious occasion. The USS Constitution Museum has several first-hand accounts of that first effort at launching. The ship began sliding down the ways, but then stopped. With a little bit of effort from the workers, it started sliding again, but then stopped again. More attempts were made to get the ship to slide down the ways, but the slope of the ways had settled during construction of the massive, heavy ship, and the angle was no longer steep enough for the ship to slide down into the water. The launch was a bust. Over the next month, yard workers rebuilt the entire set of ways, increasing the slope so that in October of 1797, when again the moon and the tide were high enough that the water levels would hopefully be high enough to float the ship, another launch was scheduled, and this time was successful. Waiting for the tide is still an issue in ship launchings. When USS Constitution was refloated after a 2-year dry dock restoration in the summer of 2017, they had to wait until high tide that would raise the harbor levels high enough that the ship would be able to float out over the gate of the dry dock. But that month, the high tide was at 11:30 at night. So again, with a crowd gathered in the middle of the night, Constitution was refloated back out into Boston Harbor after a 2-year restoration period.